everyone. I'm John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Well, Kathy Reichs is back. The New York Times best-selling author has just released The Bone Code, the 20th book in the award-winning Bones series, featuring forensic anthropologist Temperance Brennan. Now, Kathy says it's ripped from the headlines, with Tempe facing a hurricane and a disease outbreak while trying to solve a mystery that takes her back to a case earlier in her career. Kathy had no way of knowing that when she released her first book, Deja Dead, back in 1997, it would begin a career that is still going strong more than 2 decades later, or that it would help launch one of the most successful television series in history. Millions of readers and viewers are sure glad it did. New York Times best-selling author, forensic anthropologist, wife and mom, Kathy Reichs, welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
And belated happy birthday, too. Let's start right there.
Thank you for that.
In your new book, The Bone Code, which I really enjoyed as I went through it, it's the 20th in the series of Temperance Brennan novels. If somebody would have told you, Kathy, when you released Deja Dead back in 1997, that you'd still be writing these stories a quarter of a century later,
Please.
What would you have told them then?
Yeah, that's crazy talk. I was just thinking about, maybe someone will publish this book. I'm a totally unknown fiction author, and I wasn't thinking much beyond that.
There are a couple of storylines in The Bone Code that I found tremendously interesting. Not a pandemic, but something called a bacterium emerges in South Carolina. Were you working on this before COVID-19 hit? Did that force you to change anything?
I started it takes a year to write the book, a year in production. So I started this way before COVID. No one had ever thought of, COVID. Well, scientists had, but it hadn't yet reared its ugly head. So when it was finished and when we were in the final stages of editing the manuscript, my editor suggested, you know what, this is coming out post-pandemic. Maybe we should put something in there recognizing it. So I went back in, and I don't make much reference to the pandemic, but I do give some, recognition of it.
Tempe gets emotionally involved in a case in this after the drum comes out with the 2 bodies inside. And you've said in other interviews I've watched that you tried not to get emotionally involved. But did it ever happen to you along the way in your career?
You really have to maintain your objectivity. You can't let yourself do that while you're working on a case. Now later, I was once excavating a mass grave in Guatemala with a gentleman named Clyde Snow, who's one of the grandfathers of in anthropology. And someone asked that question. He said, you know what? If you have to cry at home in your bed. You don't do it at the gravesite. You don't let yourself become emotionally involved at that point. So yeah, there are some. I guess the ones that bothered me the most are the children, the child homicides, the beaten babies, the shaken babies, that kind of, the innocent victims who did nothing to bring that violence on themselves.
Did that get easier as your career went along rather than maybe when you first started?
Maybe a little, but those cases are never easy. When you see dead children, that's never easy.
You mentioned Wilmington in the book, and you actually spoke here in town to the Cape Fear Crime Conference many years ago.
Okay.
I know you live near the coast in South Carolina, but do you ever get down here to southeastern North Carolina?
Not as often. I live in Charlotte, but I have a home. I'm talking to you from Isle of Palms, down near Charleston. So I'm busy, commuting between those 2 places, I guess you'd say. And this is kind of the family home. So my kids gather here and my grandkids gather here. So we tend to, although my 2 grandsons right now are in Wilmington at
nice.
The beach. Yeah.
A hurricane hits in the book between Charleston and Savannah. And the caricature you paint of the news anchor delivering the information, John Medford, is not necessarily glowing.
Well, I was just having some fun with that. So.
And as somebody who does that, I was going to say, is that a caricature of somebody you met, or are you just having fun tongue in cheek?
I'm just having fun with it. It's kind of a conglomerate of, maybe some people I've seen on the media somewhere, but it was just more for fun.
I thought that was it made me laugh with some of the lines you used to describe him. I thought that was funny. Your
Good.
dialogue is so descriptive and so educational to me when I read it. And the one piece that really stuck out to me in this book is that the burial lay fully exposed, saturated by the percolating groundwater and crushed by the weight of overlying soil. The makeshift coffin had collapsed and now wrapped the body bag like a sodden diaper. That's something that most people can identify with in a scene that very few people can identify with.
Yeah, yeah. We all know those diapers, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think that that's what makes it real and educational for many of us. We can have a sense of what it's like.
Yeah, and I think that's why I write murder mysteries, good old-fashioned murder mysteries. But the difference is the solutions are driven by science. So I do put in detail about science. I try to keep it short because people don't want, to read a textbook. But I think they want to learn something along the way. So I do put in details, and hopefully I stay away from jargon that we would use amongst ourselves as specialists. And hopefully it's a little educational and understandable.
Well, I found that one is, because how many of us have ever been along a gravesite where they've brought out bodies, but to know that it was like a sodden diaper, and now with a grandson that's about to be 2 years old, there are sodden diapers around the house now, I can have an idea of what it's like at a gravesite.
I think the most frequently quoted descriptive phrase I ever wrote, I was describing flies on a body, and I compared them. I said the flies were like academics at a free buffet. I've gotten a lot of feedback, especially from my academic colleagues.
I know that you're one of less than 100 forensic anthropologists that are certified, but when you all get together, do you talk shop? Do you talk cases? Do you talk about each other, what cases you're working on? What's that dialogue like?
It's, we have cleared entire restaurants. I go annually to the American Academy of Forensic Sciences meetings. It's our national professional body. And so everybody's there, the forensic dentists and the pathologists and the forensic toxicologists and the chemists and, the hair and fiber analysis people. And we'll often go out to dinner, and we will be discussing different cases, and quietly the place will empty. I guess we're a little too loud.
That's funny, but it is a very exclusive club.
I don't know how many of us are board certified in forensic anthropology now. I think maybe something like 120 some certificates, because it's a process. You have to sit for you have to have a PhD, you have to submit for candidacy, and then you have to take a 2-part exam, both practical and written. So, we're up to maybe 120, but not everybody's still alive. So I don't know how many are actually out there practicing.
You say that all of your books and the stories are based on cases that you worked on. Can you give us a little background on the case that is the basis for the Bone Code?
Yeah, my books some are based on cases that I've worked on. Some are based on cases that I've discussed with colleagues that weren't necessarily mine. And some are what we used to call in the writer's room for the show, Bones, ripped from the headlines. And this one was more ripped from the headlines. I read a little story about a doctor in China who, against all ethical agreements, took our knowledge. We now have the whole human genome mapped. Mm-hmm. And we have tools that can edit the genome, CRISPR. So he took that knowledge, he took that technology, and he went ahead and he altered the genomes of 2 unborn babies. So I read that and I thought, that's an interesting premise. What if someone did that for nefarious reasons, for not honorable reasons, personal profit or whatever. So that's kind of what kickstarted that whole process of me asking myself, well, what if this and what if that and what if that?
In the 90s, you were a college professor. You were working cases as a forensic anthropologist. You were a mom. You had 3 kids. What sparked you to write? I know you said you thought you wanted to publish a book and that people would find it interesting, but was there one small thing that sparked you to write? And do you remember when you actually typed those first words on the page for Deja Dead?
I do remember that. I remember thinking about my opening sentence. I can remember my opening sentence to this day, 20 whatever years later. It was several things that came together. First of all, I was promoted to full professor at the university, which is the highest rank you can attain. So I was free to do, basically whatever I wanted to do. Second of all, I had just worked on a serial murder case, which had some very interesting elements to it. So I had the core idea for a story. Third, I had 3 kids and they were all talking about going to private universities, and that's pretty expensive stuff in the US. So I thought I had a colleague who was writing paperback novels on the side and making a little income on the side. So all of those things kind of came together. And I said, I'm going to try this. I'm going to give it a shot. I've never written fiction. And, we'll see. I'll finish the book. I promised myself I'll finish the book. I did it in secret. That took me 2 years because I wrote it in the morning before I'd go onto campus or during weekends or during vacations, that kind of thing. So that's how Deja Dead came about.
And writing that first sentence, was that like the first hurdle in the race?
Yeah, I knew your opening sentence was really important, and it had to be something to catch a publisher's attention and then certainly the reader's attention. So I gave that a lot of thought. What would be, what would be a line that people would read and say, whoa, what does that mean? And lead them into the story.
Did you have more than one? Did you try and then hit delete and go back and try it 2 or 3 times? Or did you not start before you had the right one?
I had the right one. I did that delete thing in my head rather than on the keyboard.
Can you recount the first time that someone of some notoriety praised your work and then you thought, whoa, this is pretty cool?
Yeah, I can remember some early. There weren't very many negative comments, but I can remember a few of them. I remember one reviewer, I think in Montreal, said, well, the cops are always going to buy donuts. Well, there wasn't one single scene in my book about cops going to buy donuts. But yeah, when I started getting, good reviews and reader reviews on Amazon or wherever they were back in the day, that was very gratifying. Very.
Even now, 24 years later, do the not so positive ones sting? Or are you past? I mean, I still get emails every once in a while and somebody calls me this or calls me that. And, if they've got a legitimate point, I can learn from it. But something that bothered me 25 years ago may not necessarily bother me now. What about you?
Yeah, I honestly don't read reviews. I don't. Yeah. So if you don't read it, it can't bother you. I might look at, say, on Amazon, whether I've got 4 stars or 4.5 stars, look at that, what the collective opinion is, but I don't go through and read all the different reviews. I might read some, like newspaper book reviewers, and those have been good.
You're a Chicago native. How did you end up in North Carolina?
One snowstorm too many. So we said, we're out of here. I had an offer at the university. My husband had an offer with a law firm, and we headed south. No regrets. Don't want to live. I like visiting back in Chicago. It's a great city. I set one of the Temperance Brennan books there, 206 Bones, but I don't think I want to deal with snow.
How did the TV show come about? I know I did a lot of research before we sat down today, but I don't know if I've ever heard you talk about the first call you got about it or that first meeting that you had that resulted in the television show on Fox, Bones.
Yeah, I've had some other offers. I've taken some lunches with others who were interested, but it wasn't quite right. Um, but when I met with Barry Josephson, who became our executive producer, and Hart Hansen, who became our show, was the creator and the showrunner of the show, we were all really on the same page. And they genuinely seemed to welcome my input. We wanted a character-based show, not another police procedural. We wanted to create characters that people become invested in, that people cared about. I like the idea that was Hart's of doing a kind of a gender role reversal, where Seeley Booth, the man, is typically he's the one who's emotional, who leads by his gut, etc. Whereas Temperance Brennan, the female, is the one who's logical and insists on, hypothesis formation and testing. So we kind of reversed those gender stereotypes. We thought it would lend itself to, comedy, and it did. Yeah. So I just liked, we were all on the same page about that. We wanted humor in the show. I put humor in my books, and they wanted to put humor in the show. So I optioned the character, and the rest is history. We're the longest running scripted drama in the history of Fox. So we did well.
Talking to you today has really raised me up several notches in my daughter Abby's eyes. I'm more cool today talking to you than I was yesterday, let me tell you that much. But the one question she wanted me to ask, because I asked her, what would you ask Kathy Reichs if you had the chance, Abby? She watched all the TV shows, books and everything. Did the show turn out to be what you wanted it to be? Now that it's over, and what you saw of the character and the development, did it turn out to be what you wanted?
Yeah, it did. I'm not one of these authors who's going to say they took my work and they ruined it. They destroyed my art. I had a great experience. I think our writers were fantastic. Our producers were beyond wonderful. Emily was brilliant in what she did with that role. The chemistry between Emily and David you can't make that up. You can't, if the actors don't have it. Anyway, so I was very, we did 246 episodes. So apparently what we were doing was working. And we were in something like 100 foreign territories.
Yeah,
so it's around the world.
Different languages and seen all over the world. Now that it is over, what's something about the show that you've never shared with anyone that could be an exclusive to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast? Any small secret?
Oh, any small secret. My goals, I'll tell you my goals. When I was on set or on location, I was basically, and I was there quite a bit. When I would write an episode, you're there to break the story in the writer's room, and then you're on set while your episode's being shot for 2 weeks. My goal was to not have my cell phone go off when we were live and filming, to not knock anything over, and to not trip over any of that massive amount of equipment that was used in every single shoot. So those were my goals, and I did fulfill them.
Did you start with the crime and then kind of back it out to say, okay, let's say we have I once had a body with no teeth and no fingers that I had to do, and then that would be the end result of the crime, and then back it out to a congressman having an affair or a drug deal gone bad. How did those stories come about? Do you start with the crime and back it out, or do you start with the characters and then develop the crime?
In writing the scripts for the show.
Yeah.
You do what's something called breaking the story, and you go in, and I found this really stimulating, because typically I'd be sitting all by myself alone here at my keyboard. But when you write a screenplay for our show, you'd go into the writer's room, and there would be these empty whiteboards. And for our show, they'd be divided into 6 acts. And you would hammer it out collectively. You would throw out ideas, and you would brainstorm ideas. Our show always started with the opening scene, which was the discovery of human remains that are messed up in some way. They've been squashed in the high school bleachers, or they've been, I don't know, put in a vat of acid and nothing remains but the scalp, that sort of thing. So you'd start with that premise, and then you'd hammer out these ideas, and I learned that just instinctively, the way they write the scripts was the way I was writing my books. that you would have your main story, your A story, which would be the crime. And then you would have your B story, which would be something going on in the lives of your characters. And then you might have a C story, which was just, it could be an arcing thing from other episodes, or it could be just a minor issue that they're dealing with. So that's how it was structured. So we really started with that opening scene. What kind of remains are we going to have? And then as the show progressed, you learn more and more about who the victim was, and then more and more about what the crime was. And then, of course, you solve it. Right?
I spoke to Jack Carr a couple of weeks ago, and he's done a great job with his books with the James Reese character. And now that's being turned into an Amazon series featuring Chris Pratt. And the one thing he was telling me is that he was having to come to grips with seeing the differences between his character on the page and then on the screen. Did you have to establish early the parameters that everything was going to be delved in, that Temperance was going to be handled this way, that it wasn't going to be your character, it was going to be, I've heard you say, kind of a preview to the character that you have in your books?
Yeah, I had input. I didn't have any control. Once you option your character, they can pretty much, unless you specified in the contract. But I was very clear that what I knew they were going to cast her younger than the Temperance Brennan in my books. I knew that they'd be set in Washington, D.C., not in the Carolinas and in Quebec. The one place where I held the line is I didn't want them to make her a 22-year-old psychic or something like that. So, we were, I think Emily, when we started the series, was 29. And I was a little, wow, that's pretty young to have done all that she's supposed to have done at that point. But it was a good thing because we went 12 years, and David, I think, was 36 when we started. So it was a good thing they were a little on the young side.
What kind of relationships did you build with Emily, David, and all of the cast members? You still call them now and say, hi, how are you? I imagine working 12 years, you probably did develop a close friendship and almost like a family.
Certainly, we definitely like a family, because we worked with that same large group of people for 12 years. So you do become very close. I still talk to Emily all the time. When I go out to LA, I stay with Emily and her family. I talk to Hart Hansen, our showrunner, all the time. I've just, been texting with him this morning, as a matter of fact. The others, a little bit less. I know if I picked up the phone and called TJ, and he's the best hugger in the world, I'll tell you that. He gives these bear hugs that are fantastic. That they would certainly pick up the call and talk to me, but they're busy. They've all, fortunately for them, moved on and are, doing other things. David has the CBS show, the SEAL team, and Emily's been on Animal Kingdom. Anyway, they're all quite busy.
So much you have accomplished in your life, professionally, personally. You've got 3 successful children, 2 of them now writing after attending law school. Your other one, who you say is the champion of the letters after her name ahead of the other ones. I saw you said that too, as a nurse, who
Yes.
I think in the past year and a half, nurses and medical experts have done yeoman's work in this country, so you can never say thank you enough to them. But is there anything in your life you haven't accomplished that you'd like to? Play, climb a mountain, play a musical instrument? What would you like to do that you haven't done yet, or you haven't set your mind to doing?
Both of those things, no, I don't know about climbing a mountain. I'm not so big on that anymore. But yeah, there are all kinds of things I haven't done that I'd like to do. Going out to a dude ranch with 2 of my grandkids at the end of the summer. So hopefully I'll improve my riding skills, if not my writing skills. I'd like to learn I played the piano as a kid very badly. I wouldn't mind going back and, picking up on that again. It could be fun.
If someone asks Kathy Reichs for a recommendation on which of your books to read, what do you tell them?
Oh, I usually say it depends on how your mind works. If your mind is linear, mine tends to be. I like to read things in chronological order. So I tell them to start at the beginning with Deja Dead. If that doesn't matter to you, you can pick up any book because they're all self-contained stories. You don't need to read anything before or after. If you like to be au courant, I would pick up the most recent one, pick up The Bone Code and start with that one, see if you like it. And if so, then you can always go back and read the earlier ones.
What's the difference in writing a Temperance Brennan novel and a Tory Brennan book, which you have with your son?
Yeah, Tori Brennan's 14 years old. Temperance Brennan's somewhere north of 40. We're a little vague on that. So the difference is that when you're writing for kids, for young adults, their social concerns are different. So that's obviously a difference. The dialogue is different. Kids, 14-year-old kids, 17-year-old kids do not talk like crusty old homicide detectives. So the dialogue's different. But the plots are very similar. The plots in our Tori Brennan series are equally as complex as in the adult books. Actually, the Tori Brennan books are longer. They're big honking books than the Temperance Brennan books. So there are similarities in structure, but there are also some differences.
Who do you admire?
Oh my goodness, that's a really open-ended question. I admire.
I know, and I want to see where your mind goes with it.
Yeah, well, it went to my kids right away. I'm very impressed with what they're accomplishing. They're continuing to accomplish. They both got 2 kids, which is, great for me. I'm Grancy. I've got 6 grandkids, and then they're writing, and Courtney's, teaching at Queen's University in the nursing program. I mean, those are in the 2 law degrees, et cetera. So I'm impressed with them. I'm impressed with what they're doing.
Anybody anybody that you haven't met yet that you'd like to?
Oh, yeah, there are lots of people. I don't know. I guess I'd like to meet Joe Biden. I've got a few questions I'd ask him. Who else? Living or dead? You mean anyone?
It doesn't matter. I just, again, just wondering who Kathy Reichs, who's somebody that you wouldn't mind spending a little time with?
I would love to meet Douglas Adams. I love his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series and how he comes up with the clever things that he comes up with, how his brain works. I would love to know how to do that because he makes me laugh out loud.
What do you do to unplug? And it seems to me like you don't take much time to unplug, but when Kathy wants to get away and shut off the phone and shut down the laptop, what do you do? With grandchildren, I think I know, but tell everybody else.
Well, I do spend a lot of time with the grandkids. They are currently at surf camp, 2 of them, and they will be back momentarily. And when we finish this interview, I'll go down and I'll join them. We'll probably go down to the beach or down to the pool or that to me, that's the most fun. I do enjoy that. And then dinner with friends. I'm big on going out to dinner with friends. That's really my thing.
As you watch the work being done, Kathy, at the site of the condo complex that came down in Florida, can you give us a sense of the process that they're going through there to go through the remains? You were there at 9/11 at the towers. So can you give us a sense of the grueling work that they're doing, trying to uncover these victims, and then what it will be like to try to identify those who at this point may be unidentifiable?
Yeah, we talk about DNA events, and this is probably going to turn out to be a DNA event because it's warm down there, and anyone under that rubble is not only crushed by the rubble, but probably badly decomposing. I'm really having trouble watching the clips when I see that. I do flash back to 9/11, to the Twin Towers, to the time that I spent there. I see them dressed in their, hazmat suits and their breathing apparatus, and I remember that. I remember wearing that. Same thing with Bagram when I'm watching these the stories about Bagram, because I went there. I went to Afghanistan. We based in Bagram at the Air Force Base. I went as part of a small USO tour. 5 authors went just to thank our troops for their service. But when I'm seeing those clips of Bagram, it's the same thing. I'm kind of flashing back to being there as well.
The tedious work, though, that they're going through to identify these victims. I watched a young man come off that pile, and somebody posted it on a social media page, and this young man came off a 12-hour shift and just walked solemnly away. His eyes, it was almost like a stare. They were vacant.
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah. He's probably exhausted, for one thing. He's wearing all that gear. He's hot. He's been lifting rubble, lifting concrete, putting it in buckets and passing off the buckets and then getting another bucket and filling that bucket up, and totally focused, because what you might miss might be very small. The remains that you see might be very small. So it's pretty exhausting. And yeah, 12-hour shifts. We were doing, I think, 13-hour shifts at both day and night.
Well, I know you must be very busy, and you're taking a lot of time doing media surrounding the Bone Code. I appreciate you taking the time and joining me from one Carolina coast to the other. Thanks for your time, and thank you for nearly a quarter century of books and TV shows. And thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, and I hope people enjoy the Bone Code. Go out and get it.
A big thank you to Kathy Reichs for sparing some time and joining us for this week's podcast interview. Check out her new book, The Bone Code. It's available at all of the major outlets and as an ebook as well. Take a look at all of the Temperance Brennan novels and the Tori Brennan young adult books by going to kathyreichs.com, and you can follow her on social media. She's active on Facebook, Twitter, and on Pinterest. Now, before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please download and subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast on whatever app you use to listen to your favorite shows. And if you would be so kind, please leave us a rating or a review. Even tell a friend that you like what you heard. The more feedback we get from people like you, the higher we'll be listed on the apps, and the better chance we'll have of bringing in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of One-on-One.